Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is lighting up, pouring something, chewing something, or swallowing something to feel a little different than they do sober. And you probably didn't think much about that. Maybe you've done it yourself. Maybe you're doing it right now. But here's the thing. Whatever you think about it, whatever laws exist around it, whatever your doctor has told you, none of that changes one simple fact. Getting high is one of the oldest things a human being has ever done. Older than writing, older than the wheel, older possibly than civilization itself. Most people assume this is a modern problem, or at best, something ancient Greeks did at parties, or something hippies invented in the 1960s. But the real story goes back much further than that. Into caves, into jungles, into prehistoric rituals that predate anything we'd recognize as culture. And when you actually look at the evidence, it changes everything you thought you knew about why humans do this at all. Let's go back to the very beginning. In 2019, archaeologists excavating a cave called Pinwheel Cave in California made a discovery that stopped the entire field in its tracks. They found the remains of a hallucinogenic plant, datura, one of the most powerful psychedelics in the natural world, woven directly into the ceiling of the cave, not scattered on the floor, not buried by accident, woven in deliberately, as if placed there to be looked at during an altered state. The cave art on the walls suddenly made a different kind of sense. Pinwheel shapes, spirals, patterns that seemed to move. The researchers believe people were consuming datura inside that cave and staring at those images as part of a ritual, possibly for thousands of years. This wasn't recreational. This was ceremonial. This was intentional. And this cave is just one piece of a much larger picture. Because here's what most people don't realize. The use of psychoactive plants isn't a human invention at all. It predates us. Animals do it too. Elephants in Africa deliberately seek out fermented marula fruit and eat until they're visibly intoxicated. Reindeer in Siberia eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms, the red-capped ones you've seen in fairy tales, and then stumble around in ways that look unmistakably drunk. Jaguars in the Amazon chew on a vine called yag for what researchers describe as its neurological effects. Birds eat fermented berries. Dolphins pass pufferfish between each other in what marine biologists believe is deliberate intoxication behavior. The desire to alter consciousness isn't a human flaw. It's something that appears across the animal kingdom, which means it almost certainly appeared in our primate ancestors long before we were recognizably human. But we didn't just stumble into it accidentally. At some point, we got deliberate about it. The oldest confirmed evidence of intentional human drug use comes from a site in the Judean desert, roughly 14,000 years ago. Researchers found burnt seeds from a plant called ephedra, the source of the stimulant ephedrine, inside a burial chamber. It wasn't food. It wasn't medicine in any conventional sense. It was placed there with a body, which means it carried enough symbolic weight that someone decided a dead person should have it for the journey ahead. That's not accidental. That's a belief system built around a psychoactive substance. And then there's what happened in the Andes. About 1,000 years ago, high in the mountains of South America, a group of people packed a ritual pouch with an extraordinary collection of psychoactive substances. The pouch was found by archaeologists in 2010, preserved in a dry cave in Bolivia. Inside, cocaine residues from coca leaves, harmine and bufotenin from ayahuasca plants, traces of a third unidentified psychedelic, and the tools needed to prepare and inhale all of it. This wasn't a casual stash. This was a deliberate pharmaceutical kit assembled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who understood that different plants produced different effects and had figured out how to combine them. That level of botanical knowledge doesn't develop overnight. It takes generations. It takes culture. It means the people who assembled that pouch were working from a tradition that stretched back centuries before them. But here's where the story takes a turn that most people never expect. For most of recorded history, the line between medicine and intoxicant simply didn't exist. The ancient Egyptians mixed blue lotus, a plant containing psychoactive aporphine alkaloids, into their wine and drank it at religious festivals. Not because they were looking to party, but because they believed it connected them to the divine. The ancient Greeks had the Eleusinian Mysteries, a religious ceremony held annually for almost 2,000 years, in which participants drank a beverage called kykeon. Classical scholars now believe kykeon was spiked with ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and contains compounds chemically related to LSD. Plato attended these ceremonies. Aristotle attended these ceremonies. Sophocles wrote about them. The most influential thinkers in Western history may have built their worldview, at least in part, under the influence of a substance that would be illegal in most countries today. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The same plants that get people arrested today were being used to build civilizations, conduct funerals, heal the sick, and commune with gods for most of human history. The Scythians, a nomadic people who roamed Central Asia around 500 BCE, used cannabis in burial rituals. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote about it in detail, describing them throwing hemp seeds onto heated stones inside tents and inhaling the vapor. In ancient China, cannabis appears in medical texts going back 5,000 years, prescribed for pain, anxiety, and inflammation. The Aztecs used psilocybin mushrooms in religious ceremonies and called them tionanacatl, flesh of the gods, not a vice, a sacrament. Something changed, and that change is recent. The criminalization of psychoactive substances is, in historical terms, brand new. Most of the laws governing drug use worldwide are less than 100 years old. The U.S. Controlled Substances Act, which classified most psychedelics and cannabis as Schedule 1, no medical value, high potential for abuse, was passed in 1970. That's within a single human lifetime. Before that, heroin was sold in pharmacies. Cocaine was in Coca-Cola, cannabis was a standard crop, and psilocybin mushrooms, which are now being studied seriously by Johns Hopkins and NYU for their potential to treat depression, PTSD, and end-of-life anxiety. Those were used ceremonially without interruption for thousands of years until someone decided in the 20th century that they were dangerous. Here's what the science is starting to show. Researchers who study human evolution have proposed something called the stoned ape theory, a controversial but genuinely interesting hypothesis from ethnobotanist Terence McKenna. The argument is that early humans in Africa who consumed psilocybin mushrooms, which grew naturally in the environments they moved through, experienced cognitive effects that accelerated the development of language, creativity, and self-reflection. The theory is debated, and the evidence for it is circumstantial at best. But what isn't debated is this: there is something in the human brain, a receptor system, that responds to psychoactive compounds in ways that feel meaningful. We didn't evolve that system by accident. It was shaped by millions of years of contact with the natural world, with plants and fungi that our ancestors interacted with long before anyone was keeping records. And those fungi weren't hard to find. Psilocybin mushrooms grow on every continent except Antarctica. They grow in fields, in forests, in the manure of grazing cattle. They were, quite literally, everywhere that early humans were. The idea that our ancestors never noticed what happened when they ate them requires a suspension of disbelief that the archaeological record simply doesn't support. Because the record shows something different. It shows people carving mushroom shapes into stone, painting them onto cave walls, weaving them into ceremony. The Selva Pascuala mural in Spain, dated to around 6,000 years ago, appears to show what researchers believe are psilocybin mushrooms depicted alongside a bull. In Algeria, the Tassili Najar rock paintings, which date back at least 7,000 years, feature what many ethnomycologists interpret as figures holding mushrooms, surrounded by imagery consistent with visionary experience. These aren't fringe interpretations. They're published in peer-reviewed journals by researchers who have spent careers on this question. So the next time you hear the phrase, "just say no," you might want to consider what you're actually saying no to. You're saying no to something that elephants seek out in the wild, to something that shaped prehistoric ritual and ancient religion, to something that was considered medicine for most of recorded history, to something that may, in ways we're only beginning to understand, be woven into the fabric of what it means to be a conscious creature trying to make sense of a confusing world. The desire to shift perception, to step outside the ordinary experience of being alive. That impulse didn't start in a back room or a back alley. It started on a forest floor, in a cave, on a mountaintop, in a tent filled with vapor, thousands of years before anyone thought it was wrong. We didn't invent getting high. We inherited it from our ancestors, from other species, from a relationship with the natural world so old it doesn't even have a starting point we can pin down. The substances changed. The rituals changed, the laws definitely changed. But the impulse? That's been there from the very beginning. Share.